So, how can you be fair with your family? Hi, I'm Claire Langton Yanowitz from the Yanowitz Law Firm, and I am creating a series of videos about fairness because that is a concept that comes up a lot when we talk to clients. And oftentimes I find that when I meet with clients initially, they say, well, we want to give all of our assets equally to our kids, and because that's fair. And then oftentimes a series of conversations get triggered from that. And sometimes they realize that sometimes dividing things equally is not always fair. And so in these videos, these series of videos I want to create, I want to talk to you about all sorts of different considerations to think about when deciding who to give what and what to give them. People want to be equal with their family because they think that will make things fair, and that kind of your will or trust is your last statement to your family. It's a statement saying, I love you equally, please all get along, and I'm not going to be here, but I want you still to have strong bonds together, not have any animosity. But something that I have come to realize in my job is that fair is not always equal. And so let's go through a couple of scenarios that kind of explores that concept. So first of all, there's lots of assets that you just can't divide. It's easy to just break up a bank account into two separate shares, but what about those family heirlooms, those tangible personal property? You can't, take the heirloom chandelier and just chop it in half. So if there are family things that are important to the family, it's important to designate who gets what if you think there's going to be conflict around that. Oftentimes collections, if they're divided, they're not as maybe valuable as if they're all together. And so, do you want the silverware to go in 6 different ways at your death? Cars cannot be chopped in half. So if there's a certain car or boat that should go to a certain person, it's good to designate that. And then real estate, of course, can create a lot of heartache. We see this a lot with cabins and farmland. And so, we're going to talk about some ways to handle those types of property. But, obviously, getting 2 acres over here is not as always equivalent as creating 2 acres over there. It's distinct property. Some is worth more than others. Some has more sentimental value than others. And so just splitting it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being fair. So something to take into account as families evolve is that oftentimes kids become in different situations. They have different amounts of money. They're in different locations. Maybe some kid lives near the family cabin and uses the family cabin a lot. Maybe some kid farms the farm. The other kid lives in New York City. And people have different family makeups. Maybe one child has no children, the other child has 6 kids. And so there's a lot more family members, that family where they have 6 grandchildren. And so some people think that, when I have one kid that has 0 and the other kid has 6, I should just divide it equally. Other people would say, no, these are all my family members. I have 6 family members. And so the child with no kids is going to get 1/8. I'm sorry, we have 8 family members. We're going to get 1/8 to the 0 kids. And then the other person is going to get 7/8 because, it's them and they have 6 kids. Also, sometimes people say, the person with 6 kids, they don't have as much in finances because they're supporting all these children. And so I want to give them more than the other child. I've also written estate plans where all children and grandchildren get an equal share. So the person with 0 kids gets 1/8, the other child with 6 kids gets 1/8, and then all the children of that one child gets 1/8 as well. So that's another way to handle it. Do you treat children equally, or do you treat family members equally? Sometimes people will say, well, my kid, living in downtown Chicago, they're really wealthy. And so I'm just going to give them less, or I'm going to skip them and I'm going to give their share to their children. And so they'll take into account, this person doesn't need it as much. They'll also take into account maybe a child who lived near the parent, who, maybe the parent moved in with the child. They added an addition onto their home so they didn't have to go to a senior living facility. Maybe the child took a lot of time off from work to bring them to appointments. They made essentially economic sacrifices to care for their parent. And so sometimes parents in that situation will say, gee, I want to provide a bit more for this child at my death because they don't have as much because they were helping me in various ways. Something else to consider, and this is something I find that people don't consider a lot, is what happens if people die in the wrong order, okay? And so that means, like, what if your child dies before you do? Something people never want to imagine. I don't want to imagine, but we need to imagine it because it does happen, unfortunately. And so in that case, we need to consider, does that child share pass to the children of that child? Does an in-law, whoever they were married to, do they get a share of the estate? And then when you're thinking about the in-law, you can do this as a specific or abstract way of doing that. So let's say my daughter is married to Nick Nelson. I can write it to say, if my daughter's not alive, her share goes to Nick Nelson. That's a specific, narrow way to write it. A more broader way to write it would be, if my daughter's not alive, it's going to her husband. And so that means that if my daughter remarries somebody else, who knows, whatever her husband is in the future, Nick could die and she could be married to someone else. It's whoever she's married to at the time of her death, it goes to. So that's something to consider. If a child dies, should the children of that child, the grandchildren, get more? They don't have a living parent. And that's, that makes things, probably finances are tighter. Sometimes I've written what's called a spray trust, where there's basically the money goes into this trust for the benefit of the in-law and the grandchildren. And so it can be sprayed out amongst those people as it's needed or based upon certain standards. So they kind of all get their money in one container and then it gets sprayed out to the children or the son or daughter-in-law. Now, another thing I want to discuss is sometimes people want to make dollar amount gifts or like a smaller amount gift. Like, I want to give $50,000 to my friend, my really long-term college buddy. And then I see the angst that people go through is, well, what if my estate goes down and this 50,000 becomes a bigger share of my estate than I want it to be? So instead of writing it that way, we could write it as a percentage gift. My buddy from college gets 2% of my estate. But then what happens is if the estate goes up, then that buddy from college might be getting, a ton of money, and you weren't expecting that, and you want to only limit it to a certain dollar amount. So something that we can do in estate plan is we can combine dollar amounts and percentage amounts. So this can help with like estate fluctuations. So we can say, my buddy from college gets the greater of 50,000 or 2% of my estate. It creates a minimum on how much they're going to get. It creates a floor is what we call. So they're going to get at least 50,000. But if the estate balloons, they're going to get 2% if that's greater than 50,000. You can do it the opposite way, where you can create a ceiling where you can say they get the lesser of 2% of my estate or $50,000. So that can help if the estate goes down and you want to make sure they don't get a huge amount of the estate in the case the assets dwindle a lot. And so, if the estate shrinks a lot, they're not going to get 50,000, they're going to get 2%. Creates that ceiling top number. They're never going to get more than $50,000, but they could get less if your size of your assets go down. So I'm going to create 2 more videos in this series. Stay tuned. We're going to talk more about being fair with kids in my second video. And then in my third, we're going to talk about how to be fair with blended families. So stay tuned and see you at my next videos. Thank you.